Hello, welcome to Simcha, a celebration of life. I'm Nikki Wallman. The Holocaust in Lithuania resulted in the near total destruction of the Jewish communities living in the Nazi-occupied Lithuanian cities of Vilnius and Kovno. Out of approximately 210,000 Jews, an estimated 196,000 were murdered before the end of World War II, mostly between June and December 1941. The Holocaust resulted in the largest ever loss of life in so short a period of time in the history of Lithuania.
Lithuanian Jewish community is rather long history, and it has this long history starting from the end of 14th century. The first privileges that were given to the Jews, encouraged the urban Jewish population to come to Lithuania and to settle over there, because actually there were no possibilities for the others, for the locals to settle in the urban environment, because majority of the peasants were enslaved and they were not free to live in the cities. So the Jews, together with the Germans, some Poles, Czechs, were free to come to the cities and to live there. So it has a very long history, it has very long legal tradition in Lithuania. So the Jewish community, which has very vibrant and lively history, and it has very interesting internal communal developments in terms of religion, in terms of literature, in terms of publishing, practically in every aspect of their communal life, reach the peak of the development in terms of size and the importance in 19th century.
Vilna would offer to a Jewish person everything he needs, like everything he would find in a sacred place. That sacred place which is for every Jew is Jerusalem. So Vilna could offer education, social life, and like everything he would need. Also, he could freely function as a religious Jew, and also Vilna was a place for a variety of organizations and very many political parties and so on.
And in fact, Vilna itself was known as the Jerusalem of the North. It was a major center of Jewish thought and thinking.
Before World War II, Vilna was part of Poland, and then it was given back to Lithuanian Republic. It was in 1939. And in 1941, June 22nd, the war started, and the Nazi troops entered the city. The country itself was occupied in 1 week very quickly, and Jews of Lithuania, and the same was with the Jews from Vilna, had a very little chances or no chances, no time to run away, to escape, maybe deep into Russia. Only very few managed.
They brought with them something called an Einsatzgruppen, and this was a mobile killing squad. And their task was to round up the communities in the small villages of Lithuania, in the towns, and to actually herd them outside of these towns and cities even, and to murder them. And they started this process almost immediately. Now, they were a relatively small group, so one has to ask the question, well, how did they manage to do it? And the way they managed to do it was to enlist the assistance of the local militia and local civilians. So these were people who volunteered to join these groups, these mobile killing squads, and they did most of the work. They were supervised by the SS, but they did most of the work.
In 1941, German killing squads, the Einsatzgruppen, followed the advance of the German army units and immediately began to organize the murder of Jews. most Lithuanian Jews perished in the first phase of the Nazi occupation, which endured until the end of 1941. The majority of Jews in Lithuania were not required to live in ghettos, nor were they sent to concentration camps, which by then were just in the preliminary stages of operation. Instead, they were shot in pits near their places of residence, with the most infamous mass murders taking place in the Panare forest near Vilnius.
End of June of 1940, Lithuania was occupied by Soviets and became a part of Soviet Union. And the officers of Soviet army decided in this forest to make a huge base of fuel. And they dug huge pits for this reason. But they were not in time to finish their job because 1 year later, in the end of June of 1941, they were kicked out by Nazis. And when the Nazis, they found the pits, they decided that this is the right place for massacre. It's not too far from the town, and there are already big pits. This was their reason that they decided Ponar and not another place.
The first executions at the Vilna killing site at Ponare took place on the 8th of July, 1941, where 100 Jews at a time were brought from the city of Ponare to a waiting zone. Here, in what had been a popular holiday resort for Vilna Jewry, they were ordered to undress and to hand over whatever money or valuables they had with them. They were then marched naked, in single file, in groups of 10 or 20 at a time, holding hands to the edge of the pits. They were then shot down by rifle fire, and after they had fallen into the pit, no attempt was made to see if they were all dead. If anyone moved, another shot was fired.
We are standing close to the big pit. In this pit were thousands and thousands corpses of Jews from Vilna, and not only from Vilna, from other towns, even from outside of Lithuania. How big was the quantity of the victims? I was told that close to 50,000 Jews and close to 60,000 Jews and non-Jews together.
The bodies were then covered from above with a thin layer of sand, and the next group of naked prisoners led from the waiting area to the edge of the pit. From where they had waited, the people had heard the sound of rifle fire, but had seen nothing.
However, there were some that managed, especially the last ones that were shot at the end of the day, because they were near the top of the piles of bodies and they hadn't been injured in such a way that it was mortal, they were able to crawl out, and a few of them managed after dark, mostly women, and they got back and told people what was happening in this forest, and people couldn't believe it.
There were rumors that Panare is maybe a labor camp. Of course, Nazis and their local collaborators, local police tried to support and maintain these rumors because they didn't want people to fear. And only later, these were young Jewish partisans and the ground movement members who tried to convince their people that Panare is not a labor camp. Panare is a place of death. And even if people would come out from the pits in Panare, what is most kind of terrible things for me to think was that there was no way to go. No other way to go, and they would come back to the ghetto to wait for kind of the same fate. So that sounds a very kind of hopeless situation.
With all those bodies in those tanks, for example, at Ponar, those bodies started to rot and the stench became unbearable. Plus, they realized that they were leaving behind a lot of evidence. So they got a group, and these were Jewish prisoners, to take all those bodies out and to cremate them, to burn them, to create ashes of them so the ashes could be more easily distributed.
It was surrounded by barbed wire fence, and around it stood German guards with machine guns. And it was one rope later to get up and down. And for the Jews was clear that they will be the last on the fire. If they want to escape, it's only one way. How? They started to dig a tunnel with the spoons under the dune. It was a sand dune, you can see, they started to dig. And every morning, in the pockets, their pockets, when they went to the working place, they took out the sand they dig up from the tunnel. And came one evening, the tunnel was finished, and they decided to escape. One after another, they came into tunnel. How much escape? We know that escape at least 11. Not only Jews, but a few non-Jews, but mostly Jews. They were among the survivors.
I had my daughter in my arms. When we reached the destination, the people from the truck were naked, all lined up. At the foot of the little hill, there was a dugout. We were ordered to stand at the top of the hillock. We were still hoping that this was only torture. My child said, "Mother, why are we waiting? Let us run." Some of the young people tried to run, but they were shot. When it came to our turn, our father was beaten. We begged my father to undress, but he would not undress. He did not want to stand naked. They tore the clothing off the old man and he was shot. They took my mother and shot her too, and my grandmother. She was 80 years old and she had 2 children in her arms. And my father's sister. She also had children in her arms. She was shot on the spot with the babies. And finally, my turn came. I felt the German soldier take my child from my arms. The child cried out and was shot immediately. And then he aimed at me. I heard a shot and I fell into the pit amongst the bodies. I thought maybe I'm not alive. Then I felt that I was choking, people falling over me. I tried to move and felt that I was alive. I heard the shots and I was praying for another bullet to put an end to my suffering. I tried to find some air to breathe, and with my last strength I came up on top of the grave. So many bodies were lying all over, all dying, suffering. They all left. I was praying for death to come. I remained there, stretched out on the grave, 3 days and nights. Suddenly I heard soft weeping near me in the grave. I recognized the weeping of a child. I crawled towards the voice. I discerned a little girl of 3, alive and whole, and decided to save myself and the child. As I rested with her, holding her in my arms on the pile of corpses, I knew that if I survived, it would be she who had saved me.
During the Nazi occupation, the 9th Fort, a stronghold created during the late 19th century, was put to use as a place of mass murder. At least 10,000 Jews, mostly from Kovno, Lithuania, were transported to the 9th Fort and executed.
Kovno's Jewish life was disrupted when the Soviet Union occupied Lithuania in June 1940. The occupation was accompanied by arrests, confiscations, and the elimination of all free institutions. Jewish communal organizations disappeared almost overnight, and Soviet authorities confiscated the property of many Jews. Meanwhile, the Lithuanian Activist Front, founded by Lithuanian nationalists, distributed anti-Semitic literature in Lithuania. Among other themes, the literature blamed the Jews for the Soviet occupation, and hundreds of Jews were exiled to Siberia. Following the German occupation of the city in June 1941, anti-communist, pro-German Lithuanian mobs began to openly attack Jews, whom they unfairly blamed for Soviet repression. Within 6 months of the German occupation of the city, the Germans and their Lithuanian collaborators had murdered half of all the Jews in Kovno.
The Einsatzgruppen had been in Kovno just for 1 or 2 days, and immediately a group of Lithuanian militia were tasked with rounding up a group of Jews in the area, and a public killing took place of over 40 individuals in the center of the town, watched by the Lithuanian population, watched by these neighbors, the neighbors of these Jews. And it was almost sending a message to the Jewish population that, yes, it's not only the Germans who hate you, it is the local population, and that local population is going to be the weapon, if you wish, of your destruction.
The 9th Fort, a military fortress near Kovno, for a long term served as part of the Kovno prison for dangerous criminals. During the Nazi occupation, it became a place of torture and mass executions. Here were murdered some 25,000 of Kovno's Jews, as well as 15,000 Jews deported from the Greater Reich. Single and mass arrests, as well as actions in the ghetto, almost always ended with a death march to the 9th Fort. A road 3 to 4 kilometers long led uphill from the ghetto to the fort, a special road called by the ghetto inmates the Via Dolorosa. The murderers called it the way to heaven. Before their execution, the detainees were incarcerated in underground cells known as casements, in damp darkness and fear. There, people fought with one another for a brighter corner in the cells, for a piece of straw mattress, for a scrap of food, or for a crumb of bread. There, Jews were shackled in iron chains, harnessed to plows in place of horses, forced to dig into peat pits inside the fort, and often whipped to death. There, one soon lost one's own. There, life turned into senseless pain, after which death came as redemption.
You must understand that the Kovno ghetto was created only after the large actions, the large killings of Jews that had taken place immediately once the Einsatzgruppen came into Lithuania in 1941. So by the time the ghetto was created, already there was only 1/3 of the Jewish population left throughout Lithuania, but also in this town of Kovno, and they numbered about 30,000. And on one particular morning, they were instructed to leave their homes. Early in the morning, 4 o'clock in the morning, they started to bring them out, all of them. They had to leave the doors open so that they could check to see that nobody had been remained behind. They were told they were coming for a census. They were brought to a big field, which was known as Demokratia Square, and they were lined up. And there was the commandant of the Einsatzgruppen was a man called Raka, and he stood on a platform, and they say that he was eating a sandwich as he did this, and he instructed these lines of people to walk past him. And as they came past, he indicated that one lot should go to one side and the other to a other side. And of course, they soon realized that it was all the women, the elderly, the infirm, children who were going. And in the end, there was a group of 9,200 that were designated to be marched up to this 9th Fort, which I understand is on a little hill outside of the town. And they were lined up, told to take off their clothes, and marched to the edge of the pit in groups, shot into the pit. The next group would be brought in, and in that way, in 2 days, they killed 9,200 people into these pits at the 9th Fort. There are eyewitness accounts of this as having happened, and of course, people who were in the ghetto, you must understand, was the proximity of the ghetto to the 9th Fort. It was close, so they could hear the machine guns going all day as these people were murdered in just a few yards away from the fence of the ghetto where they were.
The bodies of the murdered were thrown into large graves and covered with dirt, a task carried out by a small number of Jews who were chosen to be prisoners at the fortress. However, with the approach of the Soviet Union's Red Army in the fall of 1943, Operation 1005 began, the operation to conceal the murders. As part of Operation 1005, the Jewish prisoners were ordered to extract the bodies from the graves and cremate them. The prisoners would carry out their work while bound to each other with leg cuffs and chains. At the end of every day of cremation, the prisoners would return to their cells. When they could not stand it any longer, the prisoners decided to escape. After running a series of tests in their cells, a meticulous plan was formed. The prisoners would exit their cells after the Germans had retired to the guarding room and climb up the stairs until they reached a locked metal door. Behind the door, a corridor led to a second metal door, which led to the court of a fortress via an underground passageway. 30 meters away from the exit, there was a tunnel that led to a moat that surrounded the fortress. Beyond the moat, there were concrete walls, and behind that, the forest. Podolsky created a key for the first metal door. However, since the second metal door could not be opened, the prisoners suggested that they drill through the second door. Shakov constructed drills for the doors, and Krakanovsky began the task of drilling in the evenings. In order to cover up the drilling noises, the prisoners organized concerts and parties. The Germans were very pleased that the Jews were maintaining such high spirits. On the eve of their escape, the German guards came to the cellar to distribute the food and then left the fortress. After the Germans left, the prisoners began leaving their cells in an orderly manner and headed towards the corridor. The prisoners passed through the corridor. Once the advance scout confirmed the coast was clear, all the prisoners left the fortress and ventured out into the snowy court. The prisoners camouflaged themselves with white sheets and reached the entrance of the tunnel. They crept down the tunnel and used the ladder to climb up the wall. All the prisoners managed to escape the fortress without being discovered and fled to locations they had decided on in advance. All except 3 of the prisoners who had escaped to the forest were caught. The group that had planned on escaping to the ghetto succeeded and managed to reach the AKA headquarters in the ghetto. They were later smuggled out to the forests where they joined forces with the partisans. Following the expulsion of the Nazi German forces in 1944, the Soviets re-annexed Lithuania as a Soviet republic and prosecuted a number of Lithuanians for collaborating with the Nazis. Sites of wartime massacres, such as the 9th Fort near Kaunas, became monuments. To avoid nationalist themes, the memorials were declared in the name of all victims, though the clear majority of them are Jewish.
Well, that brings us to the end of this week's show. Thank you so much for watching. And if you'd like to catch any of our previous episodes, you can find them on our website at www.spiritsister.co.za. And of course, we love hearing from you, so find us on Facebook at Spirit Sister Productions. As always, from me, Nikki, and the team, shalom and have a safe and peaceful week.